Alrighty students, welcome to Classics 160D2, a classical mythology, and today's lecture 6.1 on two of the gods, or goddesses, one of each I guess, nearest and dearest to the heart of Athenians. We have Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war, and Poseidon, the god of the sea. What we're going to do today is talk a little about kind of who they are, some of the myths associated with them, and then what we'll do on Wednesday is we'll move on from the myths themselves to look at the city of Athens and kind of take a more archaeological approach to how the conception of these gods is imprinted on the urban fabric of the city of Athens. So you got that to get excited for Wednesday. All right, so here's what we got on the docket today. We'll start with a very brief recap, a few announcements, and then we will talk about the birth of Athena, split, kind of coming out of the split head of Zeus. From there, we will tell the story of Athena and Arachne and the tangled webs we weave. We will look at Athena's relationship with the heroes of ancient Greek mythology, and what we'll end up seeing is that she's frequently a really supportive factor in them accomplishing some of their heroic deeds. And then for the last part of today's class, we'll move on from Athena to Poseidon, and we'll take a look kind of at his attributes, how to recognize him, that sort of thing, and then close today with one of the myths that brings both of these deities together. So the myth of the contest for the patronage of the city of Athens. So that's what we have on the docket today. In terms of announcements and recap, you guys know the deal now, right? Put it in speaker view. You can see me, you can see the notes, you can see everything. If you have questions, go ahead and send your TA a message. It's a little difficult for me to respond as I'm talking here, but they'll get back to you as soon as possible. The other big announcement, research proposal drafts are due this Friday, all right? And you're gonna want to, if you have questions about your topic or how to accomplish it or anything along those lines, you'll want to get in touch with your TA. Now, this is a huge class and even the TAs are responsible for quite a few students. And so you want to make sure that if you have a question that needs answering, get that into them by Wednesday, right? That'll give them at least a full day to respond to you so that you still have a little bit of time to implement it. The earlier the better though, right? So one of the things I'd recommend is like tonight, tomorrow morning, sit down, really think about this and start your kind of actual writing process. And so that you'll know in kind of plenty of time in advance, if you run into a roadblock, that you've got the time to get in touch with them. Okay, so that's my advice there. TAs. So one of the things I was looking at the PDF that was attached to the assignment submission folder, and it looked like it had last year's assignment sheet on it, so I took that off of there. If you have an updated one, put it on there. If it is just last year's that we're using, go ahead and re-put that on there. Make sure that the assignment sheet is attached to the submission folder though, so that everybody can kind of find that as they're starting to work through the research proposal draft. So I think that's all on the announcement front. Yeah, get in touch with the TAs early if you have questions about how to finish things. All right, and then in terms of recap, right? We've started to get through quite a few gods and goddesses, right? So we've got like Zeus hurling lightning bolts, Hera and her majestic kind of like power, right? With her scepter and her crown. We've got Hades looking like pretty happy with himself with his little dog Cerberus, right? And his bident. We've got one of the great Greek sculptures of all time here, right? With poor baby Hephaestus being tossed out of Olympus by Zeus and Hera, holding his little baby hammer along the way. It's like, I wonder if they made like little toy hammers to give to little Olympian babies. I don't know. We've got Demeter, right? Demeter in better times, it looks like here, right? With a cornucopia full of the produce that is arising from the ground. We've got the beautiful Aphrodite of Melos, right? So I guess we didn't really talk about that. I feel like everybody's heard of the Venus de Milo, right? Everybody's heard of the Venus de Milo. That is like just another, that's like the Roman name for like one of the most famous Greek statues of all time. What you're looking at right here, right? The Aphrodite of Melos, right? So Melos is an island in the Aegean, in the sea between like modern day Greece and modern day Turkey. The statue, the famous statue, is found on that island. You can still like drive around today, and it's on the back hillside, and it's kind of cool. There's just like a little like wooden post in the ground that says like the Venus de Milo was found here. But yeah, the Aphrodite of Milos, the Venus de Milo, all the same thing. And then of course we've got Ares, right, the god of war, and in particular the god of kind of like a rage, bloodlust sort of war. And we'll see how that contrasts with Athena, who we'll be talking about today. So we're about halfway through our journey through the Olympians, and we'll finish off this story before we get to the midterm in a couple weeks. One of the things I'm going to do for Wednesday is also put a study guide up for the midterm. I'm going to tell you now, it's like not that useful. Basically what it is like a list of all the different kind of like gods and goddesses, a list of all the different myths, a list of all the different rituals, a list of all the different sites we've talked about. So it's got a lot of stuff on there. What I would recommend doing is like downloading it and then just starting the process a couple weeks early. Just kind of write out your notes for each one of those things. And if you feel confident going down the list and like you've got something to say about all those things, you're probably going to be in pretty good shape for the midterm. Again, the way that's going to look, a few multiple choice questions and at least one essay, maybe two. And you'll be doing it all online, obviously, and it's going to be open note as well. All right, very good. Very good. Very good. All right, let's move on. So, a splitting headache, part 2 of today's journey. So we've got our overview slide here, right, with our Athena in bronze on the right-hand side. One of the things that's really interesting, right, we get very few bronze statues from antiquity, and we have a lot more like marble sculptural statues, right? And we tend to think almost of like the marble sculptures as like looking, I don't know, better or like more, I don't know, like sophisticated or something like that. In antiquity, it would have been the metal sculptures, the bronze sculptures like this, that really anything bronze, that would have had kind of a higher status. But we don't have very many of them left, kind of because you can do things with bronze statues, right? Like once you end up getting a marble statue of like the Venus de Milo, like there's not that much else you can do. Like you could carve it into a smaller statue of somebody else, I guess. But like you can't like use a Venus de Milo as like armor for yourself or something like that, right? But bronze you totally can, right? So if you're like a Roman army and you come in and you see the statue and you're like, all right, I guess that's fine, but we need like 30 swords. You just melt the statue down and you make 30 swords, right? So anyway, it's kind of cool when you still have these. In antiquity, these bronze or metal sculptures really would have been the pinnacle of sculpture. One of the cool things about this one as well is you'll very rarely see them with any eyes left, and that's because the eyes would have been put in afterwards. So they're inset or inlaid into the bronze itself, and you can see this one is still in there with the kind of eyes and especially the irises made out of some sort of colorful stone. But let's get over here. Let's take a look at the kind of general information about Athena. She is not one of the not one of the Cronus and Rhea offspring like we've seen a lot of so far, but rather she is the daughter of Zeus and the Titaness Metis, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. She herself kinda sorta has a kid, right? We'll see that she's known as one of the virgin goddesses, but she also kind of has a kid, and that's because of like Poseidon being really creepy. We'll talk about that on Wednesday. When you're looking to identify Athena, look for a couple things, right? So if you've got a female instead of a male, right, who's clothed in like armor and a helmet and holding a spear and a shield, you can bet you're probably looking at Athena. In addition, go ahead and look for other symbols associated with her, right? So on the helmet here, we can see the little owl. The owl's the animal associated with Athena. We'll see why that is. And then what we'll take a look at over the next couple days are some of the sites and rituals associated with Athena as well. In particular, the most famous temple in all of the Greek world, right? The Parthenon itself, dedicated to Athena. And then the ritual associated with Athena and the Parthenon, which is known as the Pan-Athenaea. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the birth of Athena. Let's see if I'll try to make myself a little bit smaller here so you guys can actually read this. There we go. All right. So, the birth of Athena, right? Athena is the daughter of Zeus. And this kind of explains her connection to both wisdom and to warfare, right? Zeus is up there hurling lightning bolts. He thinks of himself as the smartest dude. And so we get Athena embodying some of those attributes. And because of the way she's born, you can see over here her coming out of the head of Zeus, kind of fully grown, ready for war. That kind of birth makes them some of the closest people in all of the kind of Greek deity realm, right? They really share a close bond between each other. Now, our story begins with Zeus in the days before the old ball and chain, Hera, right? And at that time, Zeus was married to a titan, or a titaness, known as Metis, who was the wisest and smartest of all the Greek deities, right? Really, really known for her wisdom. And so they hook up, right? But what ends up happening, right? You kind of look back to this story of Cronus and Rhea. What ends up happening is something very similar. And so we get Zeus getting a sort of prophecy that he's going to be overthrown by one of his children. And so he basically starts doing the same thing, almost. Instead of eating his children this time, what he does is he just eats his wife. Poor old Metis over here, Zeus just eats her like a big plate of nachos, right? And next thing you know, she's gone. Right? Problem solved. Well, problem not actually solved. And years later, we have Zeus sitting around. Now he's with the old ball and chain, good old Hera. And he's got this headache, right? And it's a super painful headache. And he's probably just thinking oh man, it's probably just Hera nagging me and backsassing me. And if she would just shut up for a second, I could get rid of this headache. But it turns out that it wasn't Hera causing this headache, right? She goes off somewhere. He's oh man, it hurts so bad. So what do you do if you're an ancient Greek god and you have a terrible headache? There wasn't Advil in the ancient world, apparently. So you call in your bro. You call in Hephaestus. Well, I guess not your bro. You call in your kid. Or kind of kid, maybe your kid, depends on which version you look at. Anyway, you call in the god of the forge, the guy with the giant double axe, and you're can you please chop me in the head so that I can get rid of this headache, right? It must have been really bad. I don't know if anybody has ever had a headache or a migraine that bad where you're my head is splitting apart. Well, this one was that bad. So he has Hephaestus come in. Hephaestus has this giant Minoan double-bladed battle axe here. And he just chops Zeus right on top of the head. And what do you know? Out pops Athena, right? And she's fully formed. She did all the growing inside of Zeus apparently. She's totally clad in armor. I guess he must have also been eating some armor and shields and spears because she picked some of those up somewhere in there. And she is ready for battle. And because of this kind of version of the birth, right? It's kind of like a Virgin Mary birth, but it's kind of like a Virgin Joseph birth. But it's not really either of those because he did hook up with Metis, right? The mom, kind of. And because of that, Athena does get known as one of the three virgin goddesses, okay? And we'll see a little bit later on with this kind of son, Erechtheus or Erechthonius, that she kind of sorta has. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at what some of her attributes are, right? So she pops out of the head of Zeus, and she embodies, right, the kind of intelligence of both of her parents, right? So both kind of the cunning of Zeus, as well as the kind of practical intelligence. And this is kind of where we get the Greek word metis, right, which kind of goes along with wisdom. So she's very, very wise because of her parentage. Now, also because of that, she gets one of her main nicknames. And here we have Glaukopis, right? And what that means is like the shining-eyed or like the gray-eyed. And the reference there, the kind of reason her epithet has to do with her vision, right? This maps on very closely to her ability to see things clearly, right? Both physically, but also like metaphorically. And then when we look at the animals associated with Athena, right, we get a very, very similar association, right? So she's associated with the owl, and that is like the same sort of thing, right? Owls can see really well. I mean, they like fly around in the dark, and the idea is that like Athena is the same way, right? Very, very perceptive. Now, one of the things that we'll see here, especially with the kind of contrast between Athena and Poseidon, is that Athena seems to be very, very closely associated with the kind of urban realm, right? She's like a goddess that operates in cities, in civilization. And when we get to Poseidon later on, he's going to kind of be the opposite, right? He's like this wild god who like operates in a kind of chaotic way out in nature, right? So associate Athena with kind of being a goddess of civilization, of the urban realm of cities, that sort of thing. Okay, good. I think I'm gonna make myself a little bit bigger here now. Oh. There we go. All right. So we can go take a look at a couple of the places that Athena is kind of most closely worshipped, right? We have Athens, of course, where we get the Parthenon, and we'll learn on Wednesday why it's not called the Athenaeon or Athenaeum. And then we also, surprisingly, have her worshipped in Sparta, which is really interesting. You'd think that like Sparta and Athens, they like butt heads quite a bit. And you'd think maybe she wouldn't be worshipped there, but she is. Okay, so when Athena's associated with men, which is very, very frequently, a lot of the stories are Athena helping men, working with men, that sort of thing. Her knowledge is very kind of practical, right? So again, it's not like kind of wisdom for the most part in terms of like a philosophical wisdom, right? Like, I think, therefore I am, that sort of thing. Now, this is like, she's a goddess who gets things done, right? You got a practical problem. Athena is the person to help you out, actually solve them. And when it comes to that sort of thing, she gets associated with craftsmen, right? People actually creating things. And kind of what we end up seeing there is that's the association of Athena with Sparta. So we saw Hephaestus like Calchas, right? Hephaestus of the bronze. And here we have like Athena Chalkioikis, or the goddess, right? Athena of the bronze house. And that's the version where she was worshipped in Sparta, kind of alongside Hephaestus. And when we get the relationship between Athena and kind of craftsmen, again, putting her in contrast with Hephaestus, right? We can kind of see Athena as the goddess, the kind of the brains of the craftsmanship process, right? And then Hephaestus is kind of the bronze or the brute force of the craftsmanship process. All right, so let's take a look at some of the realms that she's actually associated with. Oops, let's not move on yet. There we go. There we go. Okay, so one of the things she's very closely associated with shipbuilding. She helps Argus build the Argo, right? So if you've heard of Jason and the Argonauts, we'll talk about Jason later in the semester. But this is Athena had a kind of hand in helping the builder of that ship actually create it. She helps Tecton build ships for Troy. So in the agricultural realm, it's actually Athena who's given credit for creating the plow. Very, very useful invention in the ancient world. Sounds kind of boring. Extremely important. People have to eat. Athena is a major contributor to that process. She has the bridle for driving a chariot, right? So that you can actually tame the horses and effectively kind of stand in the chariot while you're being moved around by the horses. You'll see that she is the goddess of the tools for weaving, and we'll hear that story in just a second. And kind of as a result of all these things, shipbuilding, the plow, driving a chariot, weaving, Athena becomes the patron goddess of all of these things. Okay, so now let's move on to the tangled web we weave. And this, of course, is the story of Athena and Arachne. So, okay, first, think back. Remember the story of Psyche and Aphrodite and Eros, right? And remember that, Aphrodite was really, really upset with Psyche. And Psyche wasn't even doing it. All Psyche was doing was just being a smoking hottie. And it was the guys who stopped paying attention to Aphrodite, right? Because Psyche was a slamming hottie. But Psyche wasn't disrespecting Athena or Aphrodite or anything, right? Psyche was totally fine. And it's still Athena or Aphrodite still got very upset. Now imagine something similar, right? Where somebody has some sort of talent. And then on top of that talent, they're incredibly cocky, disrespectful of the gods, and you have the story of Athena and Arachne. Okay, so the story of Athena and Arachne. Now, it all begins with Arachne, right? And Arachne is she's a woman, she's a weaver in the little town of Lydia in northern Greece. So kind of way out, away from Athens, in this little kind of backwater. But even being from this tiny little town, she's started to gain a level of notoriety, right? A level of fame for her abilities in the realm of weaving, right? So she's going down to the agora, the marketplace. She's selling all her stuff, lots of drachmas, lots of money, and she's becoming famous for it. Now, no mortal woman was even close to her in the realm of weaving. And because of that, she started to get kind of a big sense of who she was and her place in the world, and started bragging a little bit, kind of what turned out to be a not so great move. All right, now, even because of this, you'd think that maybe she wouldn't make some friends, maybe people would get angry at bragging. Her weaving skills were just so good that people were still this is incredible. So Arachne's going around and she's bragging to anyone who will listen, right? And she's talking about how awesome she is at weaving. And she's talking about how she taught all of these skills herself, right? This isn't divine inspiration. This is hard work that she's been putting in to produce such skill. And how as a result of this hard work and the talent that she's created for herself by herself, she could even beat the goddess Athena in a weaving contest. Now, once Athena hears this, right, she is not happy at all, right? And she's ready to teach this puny human a lesson. But she's not going for some sort of easy punishment, not just throwing a lightning bolt and killing her, stabbing her with a spear or something like that. Like these divine retributions that you guys have seen so far, right? This one is going to be kind of poetic justice, right? It's going to add insult to injury. But Athena is also right? She's the goddess of wisdom. She's a thoughtful person, right? And she wants to give Arachne another chance. And so Athena turns herself into this kind of old lady, right? And she wanders down into actual Greece, into the actual human realm. And she goes over to Lydia, and she goes to Arachne's house. And she's this old lady who walks in and she's oh, "Oh, Arachne, you're very good at weaving, but maybe you should treat the gods a little better." Right? She's like basically telling Arachne, like, please, apologize to Athena. Your weaving is beautiful, but be humble, be respectful of the gods, make amends for what you've done, right? So she tells this to Arachne. And Arachne has a terrible response, right? So Arachne takes her like spool of thread and is like, "Get out of here, you crazy old hag," right? Like, I don't need you around. And that was, believe it or not the right response. That wasn't what Athena was looking for there. So Athena like starts growing, right? She like throws off her hood. She like doubles or triples in size. And she is like revealing herself in all of her glory as one of the Olympian gods. And she throws down the challenge. She's like, "All right, it's on. The weaving contest is on." Now, Arachne, believe it or not, is actually excited about this, right? So Arachne's like, "Cool, right? I'll show you what's up. I'm weave like a boss." Now, so the weaving contest is on, and they start weaving, right? And Athena is like weaving her like divine masterpiece over here, right? It's dope as hell, right? Like, people are loving what Athena's weaving. Arachne has clearly not learned her lesson. So Arachne's over there. She's also weaving this like bomb-ass masterpiece of a tapestry. But what she's doing is like weaving a tapestry of like Athena's dad, right? Zeus, like going around like banging a lot of mortals and goddesses, and like Athena's mom, like Metis, all like crying and stuff like that. And so like, I mean, this is really pushing it. But they finish their weavings, their tapestries, or whatever they were weaving, right? And after it's over, right? Even Athena, even though she was super offended, she was like, "Damn, like, that's dope as hell, right? Like, that is a bomb-ass tapestry. And it's technically skillfully perfect, right?" Now, Arachne still has not learned her lesson, right? So Arachne is now like, I told you I was the best. I'm way better than you." And that like was basically the straw that broke the camel's back, or the words that broke Athena's back, or something along those lines. And it was not a good move. And so what Athena ends up doing, right? She says, "You disrespectful little brat," right? "You like weaving? You like weaving so much? Well, how about you weave forever, right? How would you like that?" And then in front of Athena, right, like Arachne starts shrinking, and she starts sprouting all these limbs, and she starts getting all hairy, popping eyes out of her head. And all of a sudden, right, we have the world's first spider, right? And the divine retribution here where Arachne was able to keep her skills, right? She was able to kind of keep her technical skill of weaving, but in the process, right, she kind of loses her humanity and becomes this kind of, I don't know, not liked very much animal that everybody steps on, right? And so that's why when we see spider webs, right, they're incredibly, incredibly beautiful and unique and woven just majestically, but people don't really like spiders. So, the story of Athena and Arachne: treat the gods good, or you too shall be turned into a hideous little animal. Okay, so with those, we've got an example of Athena maybe taking a little offense at the way that people were behaving. But very, very frequently, Athena is seen as somebody who helps out, right? And in particular, when we look at a lot of the stories of the heroes of Greek mythology, we'll see Athena as one of the kind of inspirations behind a lot of different kind of moments here. So again, when we look at Athena in war, one of the things that we want to kind of keep in mind is she is the good aspects of warfare. Okay, right? So she is like courage and bravery and intelligence and cunning and the strategy behind battle plans, that sort of thing. And so, as an example, right, when we look at the Iliad, one of the ways that Achilles is able to push the Trojans back, like when he actually gets into the battle, is through this kind of deception with Athena's help, right? So it's not necessarily his brute force, but rather this kind of deception where Athena helps out that's able to push the Trojans back. And when we look at actual warfare in ancient Greece, we see a lot of the things that kind of embody these positive aspects. So the kind of main battle formation, when we get to kind of the middle of the Archaic period through the Classical period into the Hellenistic period, for most of like what we would normally call ancient Greece, is known as the phalanx, right? And so if you've seen the 300, right, like where we've got the kind of image from here, right, these guys are set up in a phalanx battle formation. And the general idea of a phalanx is that you get a bunch of very heavily armed people lined up next to each other. And the way it works is you have like a massive shield, right, on your left arm, okay? And the shield is so big that it covers about half of you and about half of the person next to you. And then you get a really long spear, right? And then you stick that forward and you just march forward very, very slowly. All right. It's not the most exciting battle formation ever. It's not the most creative thing ever, but you just walk forward very, very slowly. You stab the enemy with the pointy end of the spear, right? That's it. But a lot of the kind of aspects that are kind of entwined with phalanx warfare are things that Athena would be associated with, right? One is like the kind of commitment to standing there and not breaking the formation and protecting your neighbor, right? This idea that like, you're covering half of yourself and half of the person next to you, that would absolutely be one of the kind of positive aspects of warfare, right? Your commitment to your like fellow citizen. The kind of teamwork aspect as well. So one of the things with phalanx warfare is you can imagine that when everybody works together, right? Like when you work together and you do march forward very, very slowly and kind of block whatever's coming at you and stab people with the pointy end, it works really, really well. But like if you like break off and go do your own thing, you're going to die almost immediately, right? Like these shields are really heavy. They're not super maneuverable. The spears are incredibly long, right? We're talking like over 10 feet for these things. It's not like it's particularly good for one-on-one battle. For this sort of thing, it's great. And so a lot of these things, right? Teamwork, strategy, working together, protecting your neighbor. One of the things that we also get is like everybody's treated equally, right? Again, you don't like... You don't stay alive by trying to break off and be a hero in phalanx warfare. So equality as well is one of the kind of things embodied here. All these things would be associated with the kind of Athena's connection to warfare. Okay, so we can see a couple of examples here where Athena also helps out not just the regular citizens in battle, but also the heroes of Greek mythology. So we'll talk more about this when we get to Heracles later in the course, but she helps out in a couple of his labors. So for example, one of his labors, the shittiest of all the labors, is he has to clean the Augean stables, right? And there are these like magical like horses in there that just like poop poisonous poop constantly, and it is real nasty. You like humans, like regular people can't go in there. But like somehow Hercules has to like Hercules, same person, by the way, if there's any confusion there. Heracles is our Greek name. We're in the Greek realm now, so we'll call him Heracles. Hercules is the Roman name later on. So he has to clean these things. He's not going to make any progress with the shovel. There's just too much crap, right? And so then Athena comes down and he's like, hey Hercules, right? why don't you think with your head up here, right? How about just change the direction of the river, right? Let like the water do the work for you. It's clean energy, for God's sakes, right? And so he goes ahead and he alters the course of the local river, has it flow through the stables, and on its way out, you can see the water is not as clean as it was when it went into the stables, but the stables themselves do get cleaned. Now we'll see later on when we talk about Heracles that good old King Eurystheus, the guy he was doing the labors for, was like, that doesn't count. You cheated on that one. But nonetheless, Athena giving him some kind of intellectual inspiration in terms of how to solve this. Then we also get Athena's help with Heracles' labor of killing the Stymphalian birds. And in order to do that, she invents this kind of rattle known as a sistrum that you can shake and it makes this noise. And this was necessary because the birds are in the middle of this poisonous lake that you can't get to them. And so it was the sound of that rattle that Athena invented that allows the birds to kind of come out of the lake so that he can actually kill them, right? And so Athena invents the rattle, right? Once at the lake, Heracles is able to shoot them down with arrows. And so again, right, this is all about Athena inspiring very, very practical intelligence, getting the job done in a creative and intelligent sort of way. Now, while we're talking about our main man Heracles, let's go ahead and do the attendance for today. It is yellow, so go ahead and put yellow down on your attendance quiz. I will give you till 11:40, and then we will pick it up with our next hero. Alrighty, let's go ahead and get back to it. Next hero up, Perseus, right? So again, Perseus's goal was to kill the Gorgon Medusa. We'll talk about that in the second half of the course when we get to heroes. And it ends up being a kind of reflective shield that Athena gives to Perseus that allows him to get close enough to the Gorgon and reflect the gaze so that he can actually accomplish his task. And then, of course, Odysseus, right? This is like, Odysseus is, he's like kind of almost the opposite of Achilles, right? Whereas Achilles is all about bronze and strength. Odysseus is also very strong, but he's more known for his intelligence. He kind of matches up pretty well with Athena, actually. And it's Athena's inspiration that gives him the idea for the Trojan horse. And so kind of one of the greatest clever ideas in all of literature and history, right? Goes through the hero most associated with that, Odysseus, and it is inspired by the goddess most associated with that, Athena. Okay, so let's move on, and we'll close today with a discussion of Poseidon, god of the sea. So we've got our overview slide here, right? Once again, we are moving back to the offspring of the Titans Cronus and Rhea, right? So he's bros with Hades, he's bros with Zeus. You can recognize him because of the trident, right? Frequently, he's associated with different sea creatures, in particular the dolphin. Interestingly enough, in addition to kind of being shown with the dolphin, he's also very closely associated with horses. We'll see that one of his nicknames is Hippias, or Poseidon of the horses. And then also associated with earthquakes. So, most of the time, we will see Poseidon kind of set in the sea, right? So he's sometimes on Olympus, he's considered an Olympian god, but for the most part, he's spending his time in the realm of the sea, right? And he's hooking up, just like his bros, right, with everybody, animals, people, women, men, everybody, gods, goddesses. And he's producing a pretty wide range of offspring. So one of the kind of interesting things is that sometimes he will produce these like cute little like river nymphs or something like that. And then other times he will produce these like hideous monsters, right? Like the Cyclops Polyphemus. So we saw the Cyclopes early on. Other Cyclopes come by later. One of them, Polyphemus, sired by Poseidon. And kind of even though he's considered an Olympian god, right? Think of him as, again, the opposite of Athena. She's like very civilized and set in cities. Poseidon is very chaotic and set out in nature. I like the little image of him here too. He's like, hey, look at the fish I get. Pretty sweet fish, huh? That was dumb. Anyway, Poseidon attributes. So we saw him, Poseidon Hippias, right? Of horses. And we see him here on his sea chariot. A lot of the times when he's depicted, he's riding in his chariot, right? Kind of pulled by literally sea horses, right? So we got front of a horse, back of a fish, a seahorse. There you go. He's associated with the power of the sea. He can control that. We see that with him attacking Odysseus after Odysseus blinds his son, Polyphemus. His other epithet is a Nosogaius, or the earth shaker, right? And that kind of those earthquakes end up being the result of when Poseidon is striking the ground with his trident. And we'll see that ends up actually coming up in our next story, the contest for Athens. Now, Poseidon's got a handful of different temples in different areas. The coolest temple, by far, is at the site of Sunion, right? So you're seeing a beautiful sunset picture of it here. Here's the Doric temple to Poseidon, built in the 5th century BC. And you'll see that it's very appropriately located, right? Because it's like right by the sea, right? That makes sense. Put a temple to Poseidon by the sea. And when you look at the map here, the location actually makes total sense. Okay, so we've got Athens. This is the peninsula known as Attica. Athens is up here, right, towards kind of the middle of it. And Cape Sunion, where the temple is the very, very, very southern tip of this. And what that means is that when you sail from Athens, right, and you kind of come down through here, and then you go over into the Aegean, right, to the Cyclades, or over in Ionia in modern-day Turkey, the last thing you see on your journey is the temple to Poseidon, right? Kind of there, maybe make one last sacrifice for him to help you safely get to where you're going. And you can kind of see it from an aerial view here, just how, when I say like this is on the southern tip of Attica, it is on the southern tip. And it's got to be one of the coolest, most scenically situated temples from the Greek world. So also, if we can get the Arizona and the Aegean Study Abroad program to run this year, I'm really working on trying to make it happen. And obviously, it'll all be contingent on COVID and COVID-related things. If it doesn't go this year, we'll do it next year. But keep it on your radar. This is always like one of the most awesome places to go. So we went there a couple years ago with the program, and getting to hang out by the Temple of Poseidon with the good old Arizona flag and overlooking the Aegean Sea there. Okay, so the contest for Athens. I think, actually, why don't we go ahead and wrap it up here for today so we don't have to rush through this one. Let's wrap it up here for today, and we'll start with the contest for Athens on Wednesday, and what that's going to lead into is some of the different monuments that are on the Acropolis in Athens, and we'll talk through those monuments, the Parthenon, the Erechtheion, which is very tied to this contest in Athens, and then we'll go through what some of the different components are of these architectural temples, right? And so I'll give you kind of a sense for what a normal temple looks like, some of the vocabulary to describe them, and then we'll take an in-depth look at the Parthenon itself and shows how this is revealing to us of one of the major rituals that's associated with Athena. So, guys, you're doing a great job. TAs, again, if you can post the updated assignment sheet to the submission folder, right? Everybody can find it there. If you have any issues with that, TAs, email me. Students, get working on that. Start it today, start it tomorrow morning, get going on it. If you have any questions, get in touch with your TAs. You're all doing a fantastic job, and we're really excited to see what you guys come up with for that, all right? So have a great couple days, and I will see you back here on Wednesday, all right? All right, bye everyone.